Great. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for tuning in today. I hope that you're all having a restful week and are finding ways to enjoy your summer, although it might look a little bit different this year. With more people at home and online, during these times, it's really given us the opportunity at Patients Like Me to think differently about how we're connecting with our community and with our members. So we're happy to be bringing you more webinars and video-based education, and are excited to continue that. Today, we're excited to continue our clinical trials webinar series, which started in May. And that series aimed to draw back the curtain about what trials look like. As a reminder to anybody who had missed out on the first one, we took the time to talk about the process and phases of clinical trials with one of our team of advisor members, our team of advisors alumni member, Christine von Reisfeld. Today, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into what the experience of a trial can look like and how to figure out what trials might be a right fit for you. To introduce myself, my name is Kate LeConte. I am the manager of member programs here at Patients Like Me. And today I'll be interviewing one of our current 2020 team of advisor members, Kelly Sweeney. So I will let Kelly, we're so happy to have him here today, so I will let Kelly introduce himself to those who may not have connected with him in the past.
Thank you, Kate. This is Kelly, and I reside in Portland, Oregon, where I've born, raised, and grew up and have 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren. And my high school sweetheart, blind date, and wife have been married for 42 years. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2011 at the age of 55, and I'm currently 64. So I've been dealing with this disease for coming up on 9 years and have involved myself in medical trials almost since I was diagnosed. And that the impetus came from my employer at the time, which happened to be Intel Corporation. Intel's as we know, is a scientific environment, and the engineering aspects was first and foremost for me to understand my disease, because it's a visibly diagnosed or observably diagnosed disease, and the more patient experience and hands-on capability we can get to the clinicians, I thought was an important thing to do. And that actually came from Andy Grove, who was one of the founders of Intel. And he also had Parkinson's disease till his demise a few years ago. But Andy was a real instrumental leader for me in getting involved in the trial side of this disease.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for joining us today. I think one of the great things about Patients Like Me is we really get to kind of elevate the patient voice, and there's nothing better than learning from somebody who's been there before and taken part in so many clinical trials. So I'm excited to hear about all the different experiences you have, both with Parkinson's and your experiences in clinical trials.
That's why Patients Like Me is such a critical point. That's where the patients come together, and all of us learn more from other patients than we do from any doctor. So that's why the Patients Like Me environment is so critical for those of us with some of these disease states.
Absolutely. All right, so let's dive in to one of our first questions. And I think you touched on it. I think one of the most impressive things related to your clinical trial commitments is the fact that you've participated in so many throughout your journey with Parkinson's disease. What's kind of been your inspiration behind that, and what kind of encouraged you to get started?
The understanding of the disease was real important for me. I knew I was going to be impacted by it, hopefully for 20 or 30 years, and to understand the impetus behind this disease was first and foremost. And I mentioned earlier that Andy Grove was instrumental in my jumping into this clinical analysis arena. I used to do some work for him, and he basically said, if you're going to represent my name and my foundation and part of Intel, you need to be dangerously understanding of Parkinson's disease so you can speak with facts. And one of the few ways to do that is to jump into clinical trials or all sorts of trials, not just clinical. And so I jumped in and started to educate myself about the disease, and that's never waned. I studied just about every day.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. It sounds like the story that you have your relationship with Andy has made a huge impact, and encourage you to jump into the clinical trial world. So really impressive. Thank you so much for sharing. So clinical trials are truly a commitment of time, and you've put so much into it. What have you learned over the years while participating in trials that you wish you knew when starting? Things that you might be able to share to those members who may be thinking about participating in a trial today.
The thing that I learned early on was many trials fail because they can't get enough patients or age-to-match controls to join the studies. And I was shocked at the number that failed just because they couldn't get enough people to study. That's one of the problems with ALS, is unfortunately the patients die before a trial can be completed, especially longitudinal studies, which tend to be 3 to 5 years. So the more the patients can get involved, the more the scientists have the study, because you can only do so many mouse studies. And I hate animals being used for trials. It's not fair to the animal. And then frankly, a mouse brain isn't the same as a human brain. So there's only one solution to do this, and that's to jump in. And I wish I had educated more people to help jump in than I have been doing lately. I've been trying to get more patients involved just for the fact that the studies fail because they can't get enough people. And my poor wife, who's the same age as I am, I've subjected her to more trials than she probably wants to have been admitted to. But she's a perfect age match control, and I get imaging or some studies that the both of us have been involved in. It's really interesting to look at the things side by side, and she's a normal person and I'm the inflicted one, and to do the comparisons is always very fascinating.
How many trials has your wife been like a control in that you've participated in?
She's done 4 image studies, all up here at the Oregon Health and Sciences University, which is another fortunate thing for me. I happen to be a patient of and associated with a research institution, which really helps in terms of access. But she was the first of a study that went through a 7 Tesla MRI, which is the most powerful 1 millimeter imaging technology that exists today. And the poor woman had to spend 106 minutes in this 7 Tesla MRI, and she's 5 feet and a half inch tall, and she's pretty tiny, and her shoulders had to squinch in to get in the machine. When I did it, it was only 45 minutes. I don't know how she did it for as long as she did, but fortunately, neither of us are claustrophobic. I guess that's a good thing.
Wow. Well, sounds like that one. That one sounds like an experience for sure. Kelly, I know before you've talked a little bit about that the research that the patient needs to do before they start or decide on a clinical trial. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know, there's a lot of homework that patients should be doing.
So first of all, finding the trial is the most difficult thing, but the study that you need to study. And for example, one of my favorite books is Dr. Ashcook's book on understanding Parkinson's disease. This is the Bible for people with Parkinson's. So this is the type of thing you need to do your homework and read as much as you can. Fellow patients are a perfect environment to understand what's going on. Just lost my train of thought. The Parkinson's disease, the aspects of the studies to understand what they're trying to discover. How invasive is it? Because of the neurological nature, there are some very invasive studies. If you think of stem cells, there's only one way to get a stem cell into the center of your brain, in the substantia nigra, where Parkinson's exists and dopamine is produced for movement. There's only one way to get the stem cell in there, and that's to take a 10-inch needle and get it in there. Well, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, and frankly, the danger of it is too high for me. So you got to do your homework in terms of understanding what the study's trying to accomplish. Do you have the aspects? Are you at the right age, right symptomatic approach, and medicinal impact that you maybe taking some trials fail or don't get enough participants because you can't have been taking any medicine, and some are allowed, like an MAOB inhibitor But if you're taking supplemental dopamine, that's why they try to get to the people in the first 3 years of being diagnosed, because usually the treadmill is you start dopamine after about 3 years of diagnosis. So they get a quote unquote clean brain that's not been impacted by the medicinal or pharmacology side. So there are just certain aspects you got to look at the trial and finding them, understanding, what they're looking for, and invasiveness of it are the kind of the things I look for. And then there's a time commitment. Is it a longitudinal study, 3 to 5 years, and do I have to travel to Toronto or someplace to be studied out of Portland, or is it done right here? So understanding how much time the patient's going to have to take is critical for me.
Great. So it sounds like you have a checklist of some sorts that you like to follow when you're, trying to determine which clinical trial is going to be right for you.
Yeah, the first checklist item for me is getting hold of my movement disorder specialist or my neurologist, to make sure he is aware that this is something I want to venture into. Is his advice supportive or not? And I've done some studies where he's not been supportive. A lot of them are around supplements, and he just thinks supplements are not very impactful for Parkinson's disease. So we've had our discussions, but the main thing I want to make sure he understands is when I get the results back, which is another one of my checklist items, I won't participate in a trial unless I get feedback as a patient and what did the trial discern. And in fact, I just finished one at University of British Columbia, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But I just got the results back. Well, it was too technical for me to understand, so I had to get it to my doctor so he could explain to me what the end of the trial looked like. So there is a real trust factor, and my doctor is the key cog in terms of whether I take it or not, and so he can understand the invasiveness of it for me, and because some of these medical studies are very complicated, especially neurological ones. Hard for me to speak on ovarian cancer or prostate cancer. I don't have either one of those, but at least for Parkinson's, the invasiveness is one of the first things I look at.
And can you talk a little bit more about just doing a little bit of deeper dive into this checklist that you have, like some of the other things that you like to think about? I know in the past you've talked about, how certain studies they might not be right for you, or like types of studies you don't like to participate in. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know, like, for someone like you, you're willing to, travel a little bit more for clinical trials. So I'm wondering if you might be able to talk to our members about that a little bit.
So that's probably the first thing, is going back to the time commitment. How much energy is it going to take for me and my wife's my care partner? Although fortunately I don't need much care, but she is a real key to my success here. How much personal time is it going to take? There are some people that are concerned about expense, and certainly I'm in that realm. Some trials don't cover expenses. Some trials pay you very graciously. There are trials that pay a fair amount of money to get people involved, and usually those are pharmacology studies. That's where the big money is. Image studies and some of the other things I've done, not so much. I have most of the work I do here with gait and balance work. People with Parkinson's have a tendency to lose balance over time, or it's called festination, freezing of gait. You literally can't. It's like a general protection fault error, the blue screen of death on a computer. Your brain gets overloaded and it just stops functioning. So you need to figure out some mechanism to start walking again. Well, those are all fairly invasive, and a lot of instrumentation's used. So I've gotten involved just because of the technology in my work at Intel and understanding some of these movement capture devices. They're all based on silicon, and so that's where I grew up. I started Intel when I was 21 years old, at almost 40 some years ago. So the technology's been a real important other aspect for me to understand what the trial may involve. Again, I'm looking for data back to me so I can understand the state of my disease, and I'm one of those. I want to plot my rate of decline. I want to have a lens into my future, what my lifestyle is going to be like if I can predict it out in time. I want to grow very old and help my grandchildren, so I'm studying those things to help me get there.
And Kelly, what happens if something falls into the gray area of concern for you? Who do you go and talk to try to manage those concerns?
My first gate is the invasiveness, as we talked about. One of them is the spinal tap. I work at the Kinetics Foundation with Grove's help. We discovered that spinal fluid really is not transitory very quickly. It doesn't move up and down the spine very fast. And so the fact that they want to do a spinal tap is really, it didn't seem to add any credence to the study. So that's my first invasive gate. If they're going to do a spinal tap, that's just one of those I won't participate in. The opposite side is I did a PET image, a positron emissions test up at the University of British Columbia, where I had 3, 4, 5 different radioisotopes put in my system over 3 days. And you have to, the science is they don't really understand the long-term effects of carbon-11 based compounds. And so I had to sign a release that this is not well understood. So, but I was real interested in the image study they were doing in the transport mechanisms to get different compounds into the brain, serotonin, melatonin, dopamine. There are several compounds that they tested, and they're attached to this vehicle that gets it into the system. But that was pretty invasive. It was all done by IV, and I had to wear an IV for 3 days and travel up to Vancouver, British Columbia, which is not a problem because it's such a beautiful place to go to. And they covered my expenses and gave us a place to stay for a couple of days. So it just varies in terms of complications. I've been to University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. It just happened to coincide with another conference at the Movement Disorder Society conference I was going to in Stockholm, Sweden at the time. So it just depends if the gates line up. I'll participate where I can, but one of those first things for me is a spinal tap. Maybe it's a needle aversion, but I just didn't. That's one of those I just won't jump into.
So it sounds like you've been all over participating in clinical trials. You've had quite a journey and a lot of experiences. I thank you so much for sharing.
Some people refer to me as the trial crash test dummy.
You said I know you try to participate in 1 a quarter, right?
Yeah, that's my target's 1 a quarter, but this COVID-19 thing's really thrown a monkey wrench into that. There's been I had to redo a study because they lost the data, but it made it real difficult at OHSU to get the mechanism going because they're not supposed to travel and associate with patients yet. So there are some interrupts that this COVID-19 thing has really stopped a lot of medical trial work.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure. Have you found like many trials going virtual in that case?
Not really. There aren't too many trials that I know of that are virtually done. There could be some psychology-based trials or some other observational-based things, but Parkinson's is a disease where it has rigidity and a thing called bradykinesia, which is stiffness, and I also have dystonia, which is cramping of the extremities, and so it's hard to observe those things. You need to, it's hard for me to tell, but my neurologist and the clinicians say the stiffness that I exude on my left side, which is where my Parkinson's is based, is demonstratively noticed, and where my right side is very loose, the left side's not. Maybe that's why my golf game is such a horror to try to jump on. But the ability to try to get involved is the biggest thing, and to try to find the trials is we'll jump into here. But you just got to get involved as a patient. That's the only way I can finalize that question.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I know you just mentioned it, but do you mind talking a little bit about how you go about finding clinical trials and how other patients might be able to do so as well?
Patients is the first thing. Other patients will know it's more eyeballs and more ears of people looking. For Parkinson's and many other trials, there's the clinicaltrials.gov, which is ran by the NIH. And I just happened to look this morning, the clinicaltrials.gov, there were 2,600 Parkinson's disease related studies listed. And at this time, there are 569 currently or about to be recruited worldwide. In I looked at ovarian cancer. There's 1,500 studies listed in just the U.S., and there's 330 studies that are about to be recruited. Alzheimer's early onset disease, U.S. only. They are looking to recruit, and there are about 18 studies that are in existence. And for those of us that are all interested in medical marijuana or medical cannabis, which is kind of, I didn't think there were going to be any because it's still not legal nationally, but there's actually 83 studies listed that are about or looking for recruits, not related to Parkinson's disease, just general cannabis use in terms of study. So the NIH's clinicaltrials.gov is the first place I look for Parkinson's specific. The Michael J. Fox Foundation does a really good job. They have a thing called the Fox Trial Finder. Mm-hmm. And you get on their site, opt in, and then there's several gates to go through in terms of narrowing down what type of trial you'd be willing to subject yourself to, whether it involves travel, both international and nationally, or state to state. There are, like spinal taps, you're willing to, how invasive are you willing to subject yourself to? And then is it compensated or not? So there are several things that, boxes you can check. Then they feed you as trials are launched or announced. They send you an email that this may be a trial you should be interested in. So they do a real good job of paring it down. The Parkinson's Foundation also has some mechanisms. My local Oregon Health and Sciences University has a mechanism where they recruit patients, and they're also tied with the local VA. And the VA does a lot of studies for veterans. They don't just use vets, they use just people with Parkinson's, but the VA will fund the study. So between those 3 or 4 things are how I find. Then I'm always on, I have a Google News feed that I have sent to me, and one of the keywords that I use in my Google News search is trials.
So it sounds like there are a lot of opportunities out there for other patients to learn and find clinical trials in their area. So thank you so much for sharing all that. So
yeah, I was shocked at the number of trials that the clinicaltrials.gov had listed. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, especially during a time when things have paused a little bit during COVID-19.
Yeah,
that's nice to see that there are still so many trials going on. So Kelly, I know we are just about out of time today, but before we go, since you have participated in so many clinical trials throughout the year, I'd love to hear your opinion about what was the best run trial that you've taken part in, and why.
I mentioned it earlier, the University of British Columbia's Center for Neurology and Brain Science Studies up in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a 3-year longitudinal study, so I just got the results, and I just got the results of the study 2 weeks ago. So it was started in 2017. I took my first trip up there, but the reason for me it stands out is the impact of the study. I do a fair amount of talking to different and various groups in the medical community, and it's always fun to say, how many of you guys have spent 3 days over 2 different sessions in a PET image machine hooked up to an IV that had a radioisotope plugged into your system? And the number of hands that goes up is usually none. So it's fun for me. I get to speak with facts and as a trial participant and understanding the burden on the patient. That's the biggest thing I try to bring to the discussion is what type of burden is the patient going to have to receive. That's why reading the trial synopsis is real crucial, because they make assumptions on how often the patient's going to have to come or whatever the difficulty is, and sometimes they're way off base. So you got to get a hold of the trial coordinators and say your expectations are out of line. You're not going to get any people to come to this because you're putting too much burden on the patient, or it's not remunerated enough. There's some studies that won't pay for parking, and if you're in Boston, good luck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was the UBC study for me, but the biggest thing was the results I got, and I got another MRI image out of it, and they're very willing to share the data. They gave me my patient number so I could see where I fell in the study of 40 people with Parkinson's, and the age match controls, they had 35. So I was able to plot myself on the data, and most trials are willing to give you your patient number so you can see where you lie in the spectrum of the results.
That's great. And is that something that you normally, like a patient would have to ask for? Um,
I think that's, yeah, I don't, you know, they're very, very sensitive in terms of the government overload in terms of disclosure of patient information. So they don't want to give it up just because of the liability. But that's where if you learn and build a rapport with the trial coordinators, a lot of times you're able to get the data.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences with us today. I think we've gotten a real great better glimpse into what trial participation is like and how empowering it can be when patients get to play that role in finding the right trial for them. It sounds like you've had a number of really wonderful experiences participating over the years. So I'm so happy that we get to share that with our members here at Patients Like Me and in the broader community. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for the time, Kate. Thanks for the great questions. And always happy to participate. And if anybody has any questions for me downstream, you've got my contact info. Feel free to share it.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody who tuned in today. If you have any questions after listening, feel free to leave us a comment. We will be answering your questions in the comments, and we'll be adding those as well to any upcoming webinars that we have planned. And if you like the webinar, don't forget to like our Patients Like Me Facebook page so that you can keep in touch with us and be alerted to any other educational series that we'll be doing in the future. And if you haven't become a member of Patients Like Me yet, it's really easy to join. You simply go to our website at www.patientslikeme.com, and there you'll find a supportive community that has loads of information about your conditions and conversations about these topics and other educational content for members. No matter where you are in your healthcare journey, on Patients Like Me, you'll find a safe place to ask questions and find answers from other members and really have a place to thrive in your community of people who are helping each other live their best lives every day. So thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you all soon.
Be safe.
Bye, everyone.